Time for the international newspapers. Elena's with us on set, and a lot of the papers talking about this drone attack in Pakistan, aren't they?
Yes, billed, of course, as the death of Al-Qaeda's number 2, Abu Yahya al-Libi, by the American authorities. But does this actually make any difference? The Atlantic's pointing out it does seem like we've had the deaths of a lot of senior Al-Qaeda figures in the last year or so. This feels like the third or fourth time, they say, that the US says they've taken out Al-Qaeda's number 2 in the course of a year. So it seems to be quite the many-headed hydra. You chop one off and Al-Qaeda seems to quite rapidly appoint someone else to take over this role. So does it make that much of a difference? Well, they reckon no. I mean, the essential consequence of these drone strikes is that it upsets people in Pakistan and in Yemen, of course, where there's also a large amount going on. It raises the anger against the US in those Muslim countries and thus provides an effective recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda, whereas there's no guarantee of taking out one man, whoever he is, really makes much difference to the power of the organisation. The only way to do so, well, while experts agree it's much weakened since the death of Osama bin Laden, the only real way is to stop the reasons that make Muslims in some countries want to rally themselves to these ideologies. And of course, part of that reason is anger against America carrying out things like automated drone strikes. Of course, it's not just among the local populations in Pakistan and Yemen that automated drone strikes are controversial. It's also the case in America, including among a lot of people who supported Barack Obama. There's an interesting article in Foreign Policy where they've got an extract from a new book called Obama's Secret Wars, which is all about this, about the increasing automatization of modern warfare and how it's upset a lot of the American left who wanted to see Obama in power, partly, of course, because they were so angry about the wars that happened under George W. Bush, about Iraq, about Afghanistan. But the book's writer says, at least in those wars, if you've got American troops on the ground, you've engaged in a certain responsibility for the future of Iraq and Afghanistan. If there's Americans dying, then that means that it will continue to be at the top of the political agenda at home in America. But in a war like this, which it's a proxy war going on in Yemen or Afghanistan, Obama has not had to go before Congress to get any kind of authorization to do this. It's just a unilateral decision. It's not going to be at the top of domestic preoccupations in America because there are no American soldiers out there dying on the ground. And it's not... because it's not a conventional war, it's something that can be ignored, really. It can carry on quite casually under the carpet, if you like, without him ever really having to address the issue in public. Now, this, they say, actually creates all kinds of new political and ethical questions. Should this be allowed to go on? Of course, drone strikes in Afghanistan have caused the deaths of a large number of civilians. And when you're talking about an automated robot, if you like, that's being directed from a bunker in Texas, it's hard to decide where the responsibility for those civilian deaths should lie. And but of course the US hasn't sort of engaged in those countries. It's not taken up the responsibility that one does if you're actually starting a war. So a lot of people on the left who obviously really wanted to see Obama come to power, partly because they were unhappy with Bush's war on terror, are starting to feel distinctly uncomfortable about this quite strong policy of unilateral decision making that Obama is carrying out in these countries.
Well, Elena mentioned Barack Obama. Another story that he's also tied up in today. He's also been widely criticised, in fact, for not getting more involved in the governor race in Wisconsin, which the Democratic candidate lost, of course.
Yes, the Daily Beast is looking at this. They say that this might just look like a small local election, but of course it's taken on national proportions as one of the only votes carrying on before the November election, and also because of the importance of the union issue in Wisconsin. They say that rather than being a Republican versus Democratic race, it was a big decision maker about the future of the role of unions in the American economy. Of course, the recall was sparked partly by those who were opposed to Governor Scott Walker, who's just been re-elected, opposed to his attempts to restrict the collective bargaining rights of unions, which don't have very much power, of course, in America anyway. Only 7% of workers are unionised. The Daily Beast article says that Obama should have come out to try and support the Democratic candidate in that race, and therefore he's got to take part of the responsibility for Walker's getting re-elected. But how much bearing can it really have in November? The New York Times reckon actually it has very little. States with Republican governor frequently vote for a Democrat in a presidential election, and vice versa. So its long-term bearing might not be all that important. On the union issue, there's also an interesting piece in the Washington Post talking about how unions are aiming to claw back some power in America, one of the Western countries where, of course, collective bargaining rights are weakest. They're doing it by buying up shares in major companies like Walmart using their pension funds.
Elena, thanks very much. There's Elena Casas there with the international papers here on France 24.